Hello everyone, and welcome to this audio podcast, a sort of synopses in and around the science of nephrotoxicity, or the science of nephrotoxicity sequence. This is an audio podcast synopsis surrounding the Chromium Colladax, and part of a special the Crux our audio podcast series in following the Storm Crux Continuum series. This is a charted edition, and what I thought I'd do here is provide a sort of overview or a synopsis based on the different audio podcasts that are in this particular series. So in audio podcast one, or the first audio podcast, there's a sort of a basis surrounding scientific and health collaborations, and how collaborations are successful when in context of serology cross-match for pediatric recipients undergoing transplantation. Laboratories focus on cross-matching paneling techniques and lymphocytotoxic T-cell investigations surrounding Major Histocompatibility Complex, or MHC, and aligned to Human Leukocyte Antigens, or HLA assays. So aligned to this, it is important that where there is a determination to ensure to ensure the safe efficacy and immunosuppressive therapy, or immunosuppressive profiles with reduced nephrotoxic side effects, but also maintain therapeutic potency as well. So in addition to this, the sort of audio podcast seeks to provide an overview surrounding works that originally developed in 2003, wherein there's an overview in this audio podcast in context on the importance of reduced nephrotoxic side effects, but also in addition to this, how it's important to establish prognoses and survival rates in pediatric recipients, so that recipients can have allograft have prolonged allograft function and prognoses, with those reduced nephrotoxic side effects, and also wherein the audio podcast looks to provide a sort of a basis where retrospective therapeutics and pharmacokinetics of previous generation immunosuppression have those effects, so those sort of side effects that, apart from nephrotoxicity, in sort of older generation immunosuppressives, there can be a risk in context to allograft hypersensitivity, prompting allograft mediated rejection, or AMR, and also aligned to AMR, there can be a sort of worst case scenario where there's CMR, which relates to sort of cellular mediated rejection, or hyperacute allograft rejection. And so in podcast, in the second podcast, or audio podcast 2 in this series, there's a bit more of a focus in and around chronic particular chronic condition known as chronic kidney disease, and how generally there's been an increase in CKD I use CKD as an abbreviation in this context, and how there's been an increase in CKD across different ethnicities, and evidence also highlights that this disease negatively impacts certain aspects of health and quality of life, and places implications on the healthcare system for the provision of care or service provision to patients or recipients. And so it is of utmost sort of importance to devise or to develop or even co-develop sort of strategies that prevent CKD and delay the progressive loss of renal function in the population. In addition to this, the audio podcast series in this particular audio podcast, there's an overview in and around how it's important for scientists between different specialisms to be more active or proactive in sort of aspects of service provision in community, providing sort of general public context relating to concepts surrounding for example, different aspects of sort of pathology medicine, laboratory medicine, but also sort of specifically in context of sort of transplant medicine or immunobiology, since historically these sort of specialisms in the public domain have whilst there has been some context in the public domain, the specialisms themselves are generally sort of not really fully sort of not fully sort of interpreted in the public domain. And so scientists need to be should be encouraged to be more sort of collaborative, bridging gaps in understanding and sharing knowledge and generally sharing knowledge is generally achievable generally achievable through public health and certain sort of health events, for example, and through different media streams to bring certain aspects of healthcare in parallel with other areas, other aspects for example, those specialisms that align to, for example, frontline medicine. So it is important to share. So in this audio podcast, in the second audio podcast in this particular series around the Chromium Colladax, there is a sort of an overview on the importance to share evidence-based practices and how knowledge sharing can lead to improved what's referred to as patient-reported outcome measures for recipients, and so thus to improve also to improve sort of improve shared decision making as well. Excuse me. In part of this in part of this series as well, in the third and sort of the final audio podcast in this particular series, around the Chromium Colladax, the Chromium Colladax. This the third audio podcast sort of aims to provide a perspective evaluation and surrounding the utility of different biomarkers to monitor nephrotoxicity and efficacy of particular immunosuppressive agents. And whilst there have been works published retrospectively surrounding sort of the utility, safety profiles, and surrounding um, even around sort of the novel biomarkers, for example, the neutrophil gelatinase associated lipocalin or NGAL and or cystatin C, for example. These have not been formally implemented in unison or or universally as part of mainstay laboratory operating sort of procedures. And so specialists between immunology and immunogenetics, as well as biochemistry and other sort of other pathology sort of specialism should seek to collaborate to develop sort of guidelines that can link into the potential use of more novel biomarkers, or at least ensure that there is guidelines that can be linked into and in between sort of health sectors accordingly. And so this audio podcast provides an overview again of works that was developed in around 2003 and subsequently followed up through developed works titled Comparing Renal Biomarkers and Utility to Monitor Immunosuppression or Immunosuppressive Agents in around 2014. And thereafter works was published published more formally in 2016. And so within the descriptors on social media, as these audio podcasts will be available for general sort of reference or sort of overview. There is some written context in relating to the around in and around where listeners can, for example, check out further information, etc. So I thought I'd take this opportunity to provide this sort of hopefully brief audio podcast synopsis for this series surrounding the science of nephrotoxicity or science of nephrotoxicity sequence and in and around the Crux and the Chromium Colladax as appropriate. And once again, this is the Shientist, and it's another Storm Lobostics production. Thank you for tuning in on this, and hopefully the series, this particular series, is of general intrigue to listeners out there. Thank you.